Christine Schneider, the visceral voice.
Welcome to the Visceral Voice Podcast. I'm your host, Christine Schneider. Through this podcast, I aim to bring you the most current, up-to-date research on voice science, function, pain science, movement, and everything in between. I am on a quest to learn everything I can about the living, breathing body and its intricate connection to the voice. This podcast documents the continuation of my learning and my experience as a professional singer, a nutritional consultant, a movement specialist, and a manual therapist. Join us as we strive to provide current, knowledgeable, creative, and compassionate information to help you restore, regain, and create happiness and success on your vocal journey. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited that you are here, and I'm very excited about today's conversation with Erika Young. Erika is a movement specialist and postpartum personal trainer with expertise in the pelvic floor, breath mechanics, and in posture. Erika's work has helped many performers resolve muscle tension dysphonia, avoid vocal surgery, improve breath support, and optimize the body to improve vocal power and stamina. Erika lives and works in Tennessee, where she cares for many of Nashville's biggest voices. Her client list include Grammy winners, Country Music Hall of Fame artists, Broadway performers, actors, newscasters, and other professional voice users. Erika helps them to prepare for the demands of the road and find more freedom and ease in their voice. So important. She has 3 teenage children and has personal experience in restoring the core and pelvic floor, which we are going to talk about today. Her athletic background includes gymnastics, track, triathlon, and long track speed skating. As soon as I read that, I was like, I want to know more. But her work is also informed by her history of traumatic brain injury. I absolutely relate to that. Mine too. Sensory integration and continued education through the Postural Restoration Institute. Erika works with the Vanderbilt University Voice Center, the Dayani Center, and her private practice, Erika Young Coaching. So welcome, Erika. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Christine. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I would love to start with just hearing obviously you have an immense background in sports and training. So what kind of led you to become a personal trainer and then led you to specialize with the pelvic floor? And then, of course, you got into working with some of the biggest voices in Nashville because pressure system.
Exactly.
But I want to hear how this journey began. What was that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll say it's nothing I would have predicted. Like if you would have told me 15 or 20 years ago that I'd be helping celebrities with their pelvic floor, like it just seems so out of left field. But I was a gymnast as a kid and even had pelvic floor issues as a teenager. So I was in high school having issues with leaking, but I didn't talk to anybody about it. I didn't tell anybody. I just didn't know that that was an issue. I just thought it meant I was trying my best, So I had pelvic floor issues in high school and college, and then just kind of lived with it. Didn't really realize how connected it was to when I was training in triathlon and IT band issues and hip pain and all those things. I didn't know that those were my pelvic floor issues in disguise. I just kind of kept pressing forward and doing whatever the physical therapist told me to do. So then I, was a speed skater for a little while, and still continuing to have low back pain, hip pain, all those kinds of things. Still, nobody, even at those high levels of training, ever talked to me about the pelvic floor or ever talked to me about breathing. And that's relevant. We'll circle back to it later. But I had college coaches. I had these elite skating coaches, and no one ever mentioned, hey, you might have a pelvic floor issue, or maybe there's something off with your breathing. It was basically just, well, do your exercises, do your band walks and your monster walks and all these things. Your core is probably just weak, right? So then I had a couple kids, and it really, after the third one, really started to have some problems, to the point where I was working in a gym as a personal trainer, and I was taking 4 or 5 pairs of pants to work because I was constantly leaking every time I was demonstrating exercises. And it was really becoming cumbersome where I was that person who didn't want to go to the concert because I didn't know what the bathroom situation was. And here I am, like 32 years old, really having primary concerns about lifestyle, working. I mean, my pelvic floor issues were really disturbing my lifestyle. So finally, my OBGYNs didn't tell me, my doctors didn't tell me, but somebody in my fitness circles and one of my mentorship things that I was doing, like, hey, it sounds like you might need some pelvic floor PT. And of course, at 32, I'm like, what's that? I'd never heard of it. Even despite the world that I lived in, nobody had ever mentioned it. So I found myself in pelvic floor PT, and that took away some of the like acute symptoms. I do have 2 prolapses. So 2 organs, for your listeners who don't know, who are sitting lower, that are sitting lower in the pelvic cavity than they should be. So I had a grade 3 and a grade 2, 2 different organs that were sitting. I wore pessary for a little while, and especially like with exercise and running. And it took away, the pelvic floor PT took away some of the acute symptoms. Like I can go to a concert, I can go to work. I'm not leaking in an extreme way, but I still hadn't solved the back pain, hip pain, IT band, or really fully made the connections to my breathing patterns or my training style or anything like that. So then I just started kind of doing a deep dive myself, like, okay, what's next? There's something here. I found Sarah Duvall's work. Sarah Duvall is I think her certification is postnatal corrective exercise specialist. And she had done a lot of training through Postural Restoration Institute. I didn't know that at the time when I took her course, but as soon as I dug into her work, I was like, oh, they didn't teach me to breathe. They taught me to do clamshells and do this, but they didn't teach me to breathe in pelvic floor PT. So I dove into Sarah's work, and that really changed the course of the work that I was doing just at the gym. So I was training triathletes, doing traditional fitnessy type things. And once I resolved my own pelvic floor things, and I saw how it was so connected to everything, like finally my plantar fasciitis went away and my hip bursitis went away and all these things, I was like, okay, this is it. This is what I do now. Like I am no longer interested in helping you lose 10 pounds or helping you train for a 5K. Like I don't care. I just want to help people feel better in their body because this is connected to everything. So that would have been, I guess, 12 or 13 years ago that I really changed course and just started doing pre and postnatal and pelvic floor. So, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's really hard to work in any other way that doesn't accommodate pelvic floor stuff. So at this point, I'm living and working in Nashville, and everyone here is a singer. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but a lot. I mean, there's obviously the professional singers that have their studios and their contracts, but everyone sings in church. Everyone sings in open mic nights. They have jam sessions. They have this. The city just draws musicians. So as I'm working, I have whole rosters all day long of postnatal people. I start to notice that early postpartum kind of breathy laugh, like, they're seeing me because they have prolapse, they have diastasis, they have some issues, and I hear it. I hear that they can't really get an exhale out. And so I just kind of started asking them, how's your voice? And they're like, actually, that's weird. I was like, on a call, like I was trying to talk to my mom and I just couldn't and I was hoarse the next day after just a phone call and these kinds of things. And so then I started adding it to my intake forms, like, do you have hip pain? Do you have back pain? Are you having vocal issues? Those kinds of things. And so before I worked with anybody of note, I'm working with just moms who want to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star to their kid at night without losing their voice. And so just starting to see those connections on my own and starting to hear some whispers about it in the pelvic health community, you start to see some of these practitioners starting to talk about voice stuff. So just kind of teasing that out and developing, okay, what can we do lower down in the body that can help give them better voice support, and they're starting to come back and report like, hey, I did my open mic night and I got through my whole set, or I did, they're starting to report like, I don't know what's happening, but this is helping. And I'm kind of like, okay. But for some reason, it never occurred to me to like reach out to the Voice Center, or I just like the famous musician community seemed other, I'm just training at the gym, helping moms, making sure they can sing at church on Sunday. And so eventually I, just referral after referral, I got referred a client who had common postnatal issues, all the things that we talk about. And she had won a few Grammys, and I'm like, okay, how's your voice? And she's like, it's not good. Like I don't want to perform in public right now. And I'm like, that's connected, right? And she just looked at me and she's like, no. She in her postpartum mind is like, oh my gosh, my body's falling apart and my voice is falling apart. Therefore, my work is falling apart. And she's seeing these as different buckets. And I'm like, this is the same. Like when we make one thing better, the other thing is going to get better. And she just kind of looked at me like real skeptically. I'm like, just bear with me here. We're going to lay down and do this breathing drill. So, over time, she started to improve radically. She was able to flip into her head voice, and she was able to do all these things that she hadn't been able to do previously. And so that's how Vanderbilt found me, is through that client. And they were kind of like, she had been scheduled for some procedures and she was going to be doing these things. And then she went in for her pre-op scope, and it was like, you're fine. Like, I don't know what just happened, but you look completely different than you did 3 months ago. So at that point, both Vanderbilt and her network of people kind of latched on to me, and we're like, okay, what is this in Music City? This is big, when it's like, oh, there's something outside of just doing my gargling and my bubbles and my whatever else I'm doing, like that can help my voice. Like, I'm all about it. And they all know each other because of the way the songwriting community works. They go on these co-writes, do you know about this whole system? Like, they'll just send two artists to a room and it's like, okay, go make some magic together. So, one of them will tell the other one, yeah, I've been having, I think it's allergies, or I think it's this, and they're like, well, you might want to call this person. So it's just kind of really gone from there. And now I'm training people that I would have never predicted I would be working with. And sometimes I'm still a little intimidated by the process, and they're getting better. And so I just think that there's a lot of fun conversations that I can have with people like you and other people who see these connections that, don't think I'm some sort of wizard, but they can understand the science behind all this, how all this fits together.
Yeah, I know. I love your journey so much. And before we were actually recording, we kind of chatted about how wonderfully opposite yet absolutely in tune our journeys have been, where I started working with people who were struggling with the voice. And then as we started working with the breath and with, whatever structures or finding dynamic, capabilities within the rib cage or whatever it was, as we started to work with that and do some laryngeal therapy, et cetera, they started reporting, I'm no longer experiencing pain with sex. I'm no longer experiencing leaking. I'm no longer, whatever it might be, which of course they had not reported or put on their medical intake form or anything. So I just love your journey so much, because we both found that learning how to build and manage a pressure system is essential. And it's essential for the base, which is the pelvic floor, and it's essential for the glottis at the laryngeal level. So to be able to manage pressure is key for all of this. And I just love that we both found that, we both came to that, and we both had these journeys of finding our own way and trying to figure it out. And so and now we found each other, which I'm so grateful for. And then of course, it's exactly why Chris and I have Performance Movement Restoration, is to help train singers and voice teachers how to sing and how to breathe, not how to sing, how to breathe to support the singing, how to build and manage that pressure, how to move, and then how to do that under load. So so cool that I'm able to connect with you. So let's see, I have a lot that I want to chat about.
So you said like, I went kind of from pelvic floor up to voice. You went from voice to pelvic floor. So I actually can ask you a question and ask you more about that.
Yeah, sure.
Like just your journey of just your own body, and then how you went from the top down and restoring all of that.
Yeah. So I had a major thoracic surgery when I was in high school. I had pectus excavatum, actually. But my pectus excavatum had kind of gone past how it wasn't just concavity of the sternum and chest wall. The sternum had actually rotated 90 degrees to the right, which meant that my xiphoid process was puncturing one of my lungs, and the right ribs were coming in towards the pericardium. So I was dying. Luckily, I found a doctor who was able to do the surgery. It took 2.5 years to actually finally find someone. By the time that we did, I had gone from sitting at 100% oxygen to just standing to 25% oxygen as they hooked me up. So, and I was marching in marching band and being put on oxygen, all of the things. So I had my thoracic surgery. But though I have never had a vocal pathology, a vocal cord pathology, I always had a pressure management issue. I had a disconnect right where my scar tissue is from this all the way down. So I went through my performing career and I kept trying to convince people, you should become a therapist for singers. And they're like, no, but sounds cool, you know. And then finally I'm like, I should probably become a therapist for singers. So I went through that training. And then as I started working with more and more people, they just started reporting more and more of things that they were, and still to this day, they do not answer pelvic dysfunctions on medical intake forms. Many clients don't. The questions are there, but they're just not answered. So then when I start hearing various things come in of like, oh my gosh, my voice is really freeing up. Of course, now I've moved also. I mean, I've always been in kind of rehabilitation. I have such a passion for working with people who feel like they have lost their voice and are being told there's nothing that can be done. Oh, like spasmodic dysphonia, some muscle tension dysphonia, paresis, paralysis. So I'm very, my heart is, my whole passion is really diving in and helping that demographic right now. So I'm creating a program for that demographic and I'm piloting it right now. And it's very exciting to see what is happening and that they all have high payoff drills that are impacting it. And some of them are reporting already the opposition. So what's happening around the pelvis. So such a connection between, and if we can, you know, if we can help someone restore and really manage their intra-abdominal pressure and their intrapulmonary pressure and their subglottal pressure, really learn how to manage this whole pressure system called the human body, how we can actually help rehab voices that, you know, don't have any other options, but maybe Botox or surgery, and it's not that those things, you know, aren't needed or anything like that, but can we cut down on them? Can we get someone after having a Botox treatment, maybe to the point where they just don't need any more? I absolutely hold on to hope and faith that we can do that.
Yeah, so that's amazing. And I agree with you too, that even if they do decide that there's some sort of intervention, the Botox, those kinds of things, they still need to learn this so they don't keep creating the same problem over and over. So, that's you know, right. I do think that the doctors who can do those procedures and stuff, they're incredible. And we need to do the rehab work either way, you know? And I think it's interesting too, just talking about the voice and the pelvic floor, like doulas know this. They say in birth work, open mouth, open vagina. So when they're having people deliver, it's that slack jaw, open mouth, no tension, low hum, just to kind of open things up. And so this is like ancient culture, delivery, you know, all these things. And we've somehow gotten away from it. And we're all clenching and squeezed and not breathing and managing pressure. So it's fun to help people remember how that feels in their body, because it's in there. Somewhere in their life, they used to breathe and manage pressure. And when you can get them back there and there's that moment where they're like, oh, I remember now, that's how I can breathe. And they just feel so much more at ease. That's one of my favorite things.
It is. Yeah. It is. And when we come right to the middle of it and we're looking at the lower rib cage and the respiratory diaphragm, of course, I'm sure we both, in addition to pelvic floor dysfunction, in addition to any kind of laryngeal pathology or anything happening around the larynx or subglottic pressure, what is happening with acid reflux? What is happening with pressure at the lower esophageal sphincter with various positioning? So I've had tremendous success with people that experience acid reflux, GERD, various symptoms like that, just by helping someone find a more stacked position, by helping them learn how to breathe, helping them learn motions, the appropriate and optimal motions of the rib cage, that our ribs do indeed move. Our lungs are underneath them. Sleep apnea, another huge one that we see such beautiful, especially because I specialize in TMJ work too. And with the mouth guard, I'm going to just go into this because it's my soapbox right now.
Yeah.
Is that with you can be diagnosed or given a night guard, and that will help with your teeth, so that your teeth don't grind them down.
Grind them out. Yeah.
However, that is not helping the musculature around the jaw. The instinct of the body is to chew something when it's in your mouth. And the reason that your body is already chewing at night, so nighttime bruxism, is because your brain is saying, open my airway. I need to breathe. Help me breathe. And we start moving our jaw to help us breathe. And that's bruxism. And then sleep apnea also has to do with our airway and our tongue, our genioglossus muscle. So these conditions, as we start coming in and working with breath management, working with some nasal inhalation, working with, TMJ therapy, all of the drills that we run people through, the impact that it has on all of these things is tremendous. And a lot of these, the only thing is having some kind of PPI or some kind of surgery, like a fundoplication, something like that. So it's like, maybe not. Let's try it. We haven't done research on it, but it's coming. And I'm going to do some of it, and you're doing some of it. So
please do. It's a valid soapbox. And I want to record you and play that, just what you just said, for some people in my life. But I think it's also interesting too, what you were talking about, the acid reflux. I've kind of gotten this reputation in Nashville. Oh, if you're a singer and you had a baby, you need to go see Erika. And so there's this synonymous Erika pelvic floor women postpartum. But I do get male clients, and they're kind of like, why are you sending me to a pelvic floor person? I know my wife pees her pants when she sneezes. What's that have to do with me? And it's like, okay, do you have acid reflux? Do you have GERD? Do you have a hernia? Do you have some erectile dysfunction? Do you have some tailbone pain? And they're like, oh.
Yeah. And on top of that too, do you have vascularization? So, what am I, edema? Do you have edema of the lower legs, swelling of the lower legs? Do you have varicose veins? Do you have, a sheen? Do you have no hair on your lower legs? Do you have, all of those are also showing that, because we have 3 hiatuses through the respiratory diaphragm, where the esophagus and the vagus nerve come through, where the aorta comes through, and where the inferior vein comes through. So vena cava. Wow. Inferior vena cava comes through. So when you have this pressure happening on these structures, we can develop symptoms and not even know that it has to do with our breathing and our posture. So anyway, I know I got us off topic a little bit, but I do. So
we could talk for hours. I told there's so many different rabbit holes we could go down. So it's just fun to explore.
Fun to explore.
Yeah.
So I would love to chat about what you see with postpartum, a lot of the stuff that you work with: incontinence, diastasis, prolapse, rib flare. And first, let's start there, and then we'll move it into my next question that I'm excited to talk about.
Sounds good. So I see this in all my postpartum clientele, not just the people who've had singers, rib flare. So, I mean, you and Chris have talked about this extensively, but, you know, bottom rib cage is flaring out. So we really can't get proper diaphragm doming. We can't get the hemidiaphragms to come up where they're supposed to go. So it's going to interfere with your breathing. And I'm always hesitant to talk about this or to point it out to my clients because I don't want it to be accidentally categorized as something like a thigh gap or something that like women need to be self-conscious about as if it's like a beauty standard sort of thing, you know? And sometimes you can accidentally end up on these like Instagram, you know, messy pages where they're like, fix your rib flare. And it's more of a aesthetic conversation. And it's just one more thing to pile on to reasons for women to feel subconscious about their body. But this really is an anatomical issue where it's interfering with your pressure management, as we've discussed, is going to trickle down to lots of different things. So when the rib cage expands, which is a beautiful thing, you know, we want the baby to be able to grow. And like, I'm 5'3". And I'm very short-waisted, long legs. So I had a massive rib flare after my babies because there was just nowhere for it to go. And I'm thankful that my ribs were pliable enough to make that space for babies. Great. Okay. And then, you know, I'm 2 years postpartum and you can still see my ribs through my shirt just really flaring out. Well, no wonder I can't inhale. I can't exhale. I can't do anything. So that's obviously a special concern for singers, but even for all postpartum people, we really want to just restore that dynamic rib cage where they can access both points in the breathing cycle, and they're not stuck in that outward position. So rib flare is the big thing, and all the ways that trickles down into the body and all the places you hurt when you have a rib flare. Like we're just going to have a lot of low back pain, and we're going to lack rotation. So with the rib flare, it's just so easy to spot, even if you can't see it through their shirt, because everybody knows the pregnant waddle when you have no rotation and you're just kind of bobbing side to side. And so, I mean, that happens because you just lose rotation when you're so extended. And so being able to get those ribs down and restore rotation in their walk. So, and they're like, once that happens, they're like, oh, right. This is how I used to walk before I had kids. Which of course translates to when you can rotate your rib cage, you open up your chest wall, you rotate the other way, you open up your chest wall. As long as you're in that rib flare extended posture and you're doing the penguin waddle, you're just going to constantly be collecting tension instead of constantly diffusing tension as you walk.
Yeah,
so the
and
rib
how
flare,
that impacts the airway.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, most of your clients know probably too about diastasis. I mean, 10 years ago, nobody had heard of it, but it's a pressure management issue. It's just everything is squeezed in the back and pushed forward in the front. And the more we can regulate that pressure and open up things in the back and pull the body more into internal rotation, it clears out pretty quickly. You know, sometimes I still hear rumors about, oh, my OBGYN says I have a 2 centimeter diastasis and there's nothing we can do. We have to schedule surgery. I'm like, what? Like I've had one client in 12 years, one that had a diastasis surgery. You know, everybody else, it resolves fairly quickly if you learn to manage pressure and just learning where in their body is pushing them forward. It might be their feet, it might be their low back, it might be whatever. Once you release that, it really comes together pretty easily. So I'm pretty skeptical of physicians who are like, yep, we just have to have surgery. You know, it's just interesting. They don't understand that it's a pressure issue. They think it's just like, oh, your muscles were damaged. This is just the way it's going to be.
If I can just add really quick that this is not, to the listeners, diastasis is not just something that happens postpartum. It's not just something that happens for AFAB. There are many AMAB people who have diastasis. Yes. I know many. So yes, I just want to say this is anybody can experience this.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Thank you for clarifying that. I mean, my clientele is mostly postpartum, so that's just kind of top in mind. But you will see, I mean, my dad had that big triangular belly when he would sit up just straight into a cone, you know? So we see it all the time in lots of different bodies. So, and then prolapse is obviously something that I have a lot of emotional connection to because my journey was really hard. You know, it's really scary and unfamiliar. And you have this feeling that's just so deeply uncomfortable in the body. And wearing a pessary for a while, it gave me some relief and allowed me to like go for a run and made me feel like myself again. But until I got my pelvis back to neutral and restored rotation, then things kind of started lifting up. So Anytime I get a prolapse email in my inbox, I'm like, I'm definitely taking that person, because I understand the emotional complexity of that journey. Like, I love my baby, but I feel like my body is not my own. I don't know what's going on here, and I'm really uncomfortable. So I'm probably off of rails here a little bit, but those are just kind of some of the things that I work with, both with singers and with just regular postpartum clients. And pretty much they all come back to pressure management. Once we can learn to manage pressure better, the leaking gets better, the prolapse gets better, the diastasis gets better. They're all just symptoms of the same thing, which is you changed how you manage pressure while you were pregnant. And we have to relearn how to manage pressure differently. So,
yeah. So I think both of us would love to say to the listeners that if you are a voice teacher, first of all, we encourage you, if you don't already, to have some kind of intake form for your students.
yes.
And on that intake form, there are ways to ask some of these questions that wouldn't make someone uncomfortable. So there are questions that you can put on an intake form to find out about their pelvic health as well. That can be very informative. So I think both Erika and I would definitely recommend, one, having an intake form and having information of vocal complaints, physical complaints, what's happening in their body, assessment, and then what's their pelvic health, and just wording that in ways that are very inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, if your vocal teachers are like, okay, I see this is an issue, I keep hearing there's a connection, I understand that the pelvic floor matters, but that is not my lane. You can also, just having the information, refer out to a pelvic floor PT in your area. And so then they can get that information from somewhere else, and it might circle back and help their voice, but even if you don't have the skill set to address it directly. So just wanted to mention that too. So, I mean, at first, when I was early postpartum training and I'm noticing this breathy laugh postpartum thing, I'm like, well, I'm not a voice coach. I don't know how to fix that, but I need to notice and track the changes, And then I started to find some vocal coaches that I trusted, like, okay, we're going to do this pressure management stuff, but I also want you to see this person. And it can work the same for a voice teacher, just like, okay, I see this pelvic floor. I want to note it. I want to mark a milestone. These are your current symptoms and the severity. Maybe go see a pelvic floor PT. We're going to work on your breathing for singing. And then we're going to check in again and see what your pelvic health is doing. So I think sometimes it's like, oh, I either have to dive all the way in or I have to completely avoid it. And there is a middle ground where you can call in reinforcements and then just kind of notice the changes as they're happening.
Yeah, I think that middle ground is the important place to be. We also don't want people who aren't trained to teach management of pressure, trying to teach it, because that is the number one thing I've seen with this in my clinic, of someone comes in and at a voice lesson or during a performance or whatever, they were instructed to do something and then bear down or whatever. And then all of a sudden they have some kind of inguinal hernia or something else happens. So I talk about it all the time on the podcast, building your team, having someone on your team, but knowing, getting this on an intake form can really inform you as to who you're going to need on your team for this given person, because we want this person to succeed. And, being able to have more people on our team to help them do that is great.
Yes.
So I'd love to talk about more. You've mentioned some of the challenges with your own pelvic journey, and love to just kind of, we're gonna get probably into the nitty-gritty here now.
Okay.
For
Totally
the
fine.
listeners. Both of us are gonna share some of the stuff about our journeys that I know for me, nobody told me about. No one told me that I would experience certain things at all, like no one until my sister a month before or something like that. So I'd love to kind of talk about your pelvic health journey, what that was. I know that it's been a long one for you.
Yes.
But you're on the other side now. And if we can, just hear about your experience, and then I'll share some of mine as well.
Right. Sure. So, originally after my delivery of my third child, I had a grade 3 prolapse and a grade 2 prolapse. And I'm happy to report that the grade 3 is now a grade 1. The grade 2 is still there, but it's asymptomatic. As long as I just kind of like manage everything and notice my breathing and program specifically, I really don't notice it. If I didn't know it was there, I wouldn't even know. I'm aware because I track these things and I see a pelvic floor PT. So it really, I want to say too that you mentioned in my bio that I have a brain injury history. So with speed skating, it kind of comes with I had a brain injury in college doing pole vault, and then I've had 2 speed skating brain injuries. And the last one in 2014 really wiped me out. Like I had to learn to crawl, learn to stand on one leg, learn to walk, like couldn't read for a long time, couldn't go to the grocery store. I really, really had a hard time. And so, I did all the rehab available in Nashville and just wasn't getting anywhere, constant migraines and just inability to drive, lots of dizziness, all these kinds of things. And so I ended up at PRI, Postural Restoration Institute in Nebraska, for brain injury reasons. So they were working on my vision. They were working on my dental. I have a PRI dental splint. And I was doing like rehab, like integrating, learning how to walk down steps and like be aware of my peripheral vision and that kind of thing. And so that obviously changed my life in that I can work full time and I don't have chronic, it totally changed my experience of life once I finally did that final step of postural restoration and getting back to that. And I wasn't aware of this, but it also was the final step in my pelvic health journey. So because of I had gotten to a place where I was functional, I could run with a pessary. I wasn't leaking going to a concert. I wasn't leaking when I was sneezing. I could manage it. I'd done all the Sarah Duvall things. I was doing that, but my whole body, my nervous system tension was so high. I was so upregulated in my nervous system because of my visual issues. So my eyes were bouncing. I wasn't aware. It was like I was walking on a fun house all the time, And so like the floors weren't straight, walls weren't straight, just my eyes were giving faulty information into my brain. I had actual damage in my left eye with my last concussion. And so I thought that my pelvic health journey was complete, before I went to PRI, because it wasn't interfering with my life at all. I wasn't having painful sex. I wasn't leaking. I wasn't feeling that heavy prolapse kind of feeling. I was fine, but I thought I was done with pelvic health. Once I went to PRI and they calmed my nervous system down with the sensory integration, then I felt like my pelvic floor had like melted. I was like, oh, there it is. That was the last thing that I didn't have, because for me, I just was gripping in my pelvic floor because I felt like I was falling. My vision system was so messed up from my brain injuries that I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, and at any moment I was just going to like drop into the canyon. My whole left periphery didn't exist. And I was upregulated, nervous, intense. And so I didn't realize that I was still carrying so much tension in my pelvic floor, even though I was asymptomatic. And so I just wanted to mention that because the nervous system is so deeply connected to our pelvic health. Sometimes I make people better by telling them it's going to be okay and getting them to breathe. There's just this urgency and this gripping and this fear of like, oh, gripping my pelvic floor is the only safety net I have in my whole life. And it just absorbs all this stress and tension from life, from whatever they're dealing with. Mine was a brain injury. Theirs might be a special needs child or a job loss or whatever it is. And we just carry, the pelvis is so emotional and we just hold so much there. And so once I got my nervous system regulated via getting my brain health regulated, my pelvic floor finally fully let go. And I was like, oh, that's what it feels like to finally release. And so that was kind of my full circle pelvic health, like, okay, now I'm good. So
yeah, to the listeners, there are central line diaphragms, these transverse tissues. So right up where Erika's talking about, which impacts our vision, is this diaphragm 1, which is the diaphragma sali and the tentorium. And the connection between this area and the pelvis is radical. It is, it is absolutely connected. So that doesn't surprise me at all that your pelvic health then improved once you started improving up around that sphenoid bone, up around this diaphragm maculae, separating the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, and around that tentorium, which with a head injury, how the membranes are impacted is, I mean, if you've had a brain injury, then the membranes are also impacted. Wow. So fascinating. I also have had a head injury, and I was not to that extent, but I had nerve pain everywhere. I was hit in the back. So I think I had some compression at the sphenobasilar junction in there. And nerve pain down into my throat, down into both arms, down into my abdomen. Oh my gosh, nerve pain in the abdomen is really weird. Occasionally I would lose feeling. I didn't have nerve pain down into my legs, but I would lose sensation and feeling. It'd be very heavy and kind of not there. And so I couldn't lift anything. I mean, same thing. I had to go back to learning how to lay on my back and then learning how to lay on my belly and lift my head. And then learn how to lay on my belly, breathe, lift my head, lift my arm. I had to start at the beginning. So now I'm like, yay, I'm lifting 25 pounds, it took me years to go from no weight at all, learning how to move my body again. And I was I mean, I don't know if you were working through it too. I was working through it. I had vertigo. I had dizziness. I have a child. I was working at my clinic, trying to help people get out of their pain while I was also trying to rehab and get out of my own pain. Like you, I searched many different avenues. And it was when I came into what Chris and I are doing at PMR, all of the movements that we're doing at PMR, that I finally got out of pain to the point where I wasn't needing intervention all the time. I wasn't needing my chiropractor. I wasn't needing a massage. I wasn't needing other things because I was able to help myself feel better through moving, through breathing with moving, I should say, through releasing stuff and through moving. So
I'm so glad you got relief on your side. And I feel for you on that journey. It is the hardest thing by far that I've ever been through. So I didn't work at all for about 2 years. I mean, I couldn't even drive. So it was like I was Ubering to my vision therapy appointments. I just couldn't do anything. After that, I was working part-time, and only in the last 3 years or so have I gotten back to full-time work. So it was a journey, and it definitely informs my work every day. Sometimes I think back to like things I did with clients when I was 24, before I had babies, and I'm basically putting them on my college track workouts because I'm like, this sounds fun. And it's horrifying to think back to those things. But I mean, I guess we all have to start somewhere. But now I'm just so much more, both with my pelvic health journey and my brain health journey, I'm so much more sensitive to all these little shifts that I see in people's bodies, and where they bobble, and when they close their eyes, and whether or not they're holding their breath for stability. And because I know all
where
those
they continuously look, that's huge in singing.
Exactly.
If someone keep flicking their eyes to one side.
Or they're singing to the audience and they're only ever looking one way. I'm like, yes. No, I know you can't find your left vocal folds. You can't even like look that way. So, as hard as all that was, and we've both been through it, it sounds like more than we even realized before we got on this call. I think it probably really informs our practice to be really dialed in. Like, I know every cheater strategy in the book because I tried to force myself when I was really hurting and really dizzy and my organs are falling out of my body and my whatever. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this. I'm going to hold my breath. I'm going to push through. I'm going to tighten my jaw. I'm going to do all these things. And so now, as soon as I spot it on somebody, I'm like, nope, that's not your exercise. We're going to do something different. And so as hard as that journey has been, I wouldn't be equipped to do what I'm doing now had I not been all through that. you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and
yeah.
yeah. So, and even also being able to relate to my artists on just the level of struggle. Now, obviously their arena is very different. They have $1 million contract on an arena and they have to be able to be ready for a show on that day. Like, I don't really comprehend that level of pressure, but I do understand the urgency of needing to get better and why isn't this working, and just being so stuck and just feeling so hopeless, and being able to meet people there and then walk with them, you know? And I just don't know that I understood the complexity of overcoming serious injury. And for them, vocal injury is serious injury, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And so, yeah. So that's the full circle of the journey, is being able to use those tools that I never wanted to have and I wouldn't want to wish on anybody. But now that I have them, at least I can pass them on to my artists. So
yes. Yeah. I'm 100% with you on that. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to chat about, we've kind of emailed back and forth about the fitness industry and voice wellness in the fitness industry, and research and hormones and menstrual cycles and women, and the lack of research in the fitness industry with, you know, AFAB, with menstrual cycles. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this.
Right. Yeah, I was shocked when I started having major pelvic health issues in my 20s and 30s. And, you know, the first time I heard of pelvic floor PT at 32, that this wasn't a bigger deal in all of my previous training. So I meant to look up the stat before we get on, but I think women were required to be in strength and conditioning research in 96 or 97, which, I mean, I was already in college then. I was already a collegiate athlete, and none of my coaches had any research or any programming experience that was based on a female athlete's body. And so I just think of how frustrating that is, that all of the information that I was given during my primary training years just might not have applied to me. And for the listeners who don't know, I think a lot of the reason that women are left out of research is because we're harder to study. You can't control the variables when month to month or week to week, the hormone levels are different. So let's say you're studying tendon health, or you're studying muscle elasticity. Then depending on the amount of estrogen or testosterone or whatever's going on, the body is going to respond differently. And so you can't control for that as well. So it's much easier just to throw the women out of the study and let's just do the strength and conditioning research on men. But it really matters, you know? And so when I think back to my very original personal training certification, there are 2 pages on pregnancy, 0 on postpartum, 0 on breathing, 0 on pressure management. It's just not part of the conversation. And so still, even though now women are required to be in fitness research, the industry is very male centric. Most personal trainers, I think it's 70%, are men, even though 75% of the people who hire a personal trainer are women. Mostly they're young, mostly they, you know, just don't have any reason to think about the pelvic floor because it's not relevant to them, you know? And so most people who go to the gym, even if they are bold enough to say, hey, I had a prolapse surgery, I have diastasis, I have some stress incontinence, it's more likely than not that their fitness trainer has no concept what to do with that. And it's sad because we assume they do. It's like, oh, you're a fitness professional, this high-end gym hired you, surely you know what to do with this information. And they don't. And it's not really their fault. They haven't even been exposed, and they haven't had the life experience where they had a reason to go get exposed. It's just not on their radar at all. And so, you know, the tides are changing a little bit. There's some great organizations out there like women-led fitness that are really changing the conversations about pelvic health. So it's changing, but it's still a little sketchy. You know, there are some people who are really diving in and doing the research and are very well equipped, and they're taking courses through Anthony Lowe or Sarah Duvall or Katie St. Clair or whoever, and really learning it. But then there's this other branch of the industry where they went to a 3-hour certification on the pelvic floor, and they got their little certificate that they can submit. but they don't actually understand anything about, it's just enough to like add it to the box on the gym bio, you know? And so, you know, I wish that it was more prolific and that the education was more robust and that everybody was introduced to this. And I think that's coming as there are more female voices in the industry. But right now it doesn't, you are less likely to find somebody in the fitness world who really understands. And like I said, I mentioned I spent some time at the Olympic Training Center. No one ever mentioned the pelvic floor or breathing or pressure management. Now that was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. But you know, it just wasn't part of the conversation, you know. But I think it's changing, but you still have to really ask a lot of questions. Don't just assume just because they're talking and all the pelvic floor buzzwords that they've actually done the work to be able to help you. You know, there's a lot of people working out of their scope. Like they're just a trainer and they just watched some Instagram videos on the pelvic floor and now they're claiming to know what they're doing. And so buyer beware and ask good questions. So, and also consult a pelvic floor PT if you need, you know, some work on your specific. Because I want to say too that, you know, when I first realized I had pelvic floor issues, like, oh, this thing I've been dealing with for 15 years, that's the pelvic floor. You know, my OBGYN told me to do Kegels. And so I was already tight. And now I'm doing the classic 100 Kegels at a stoplight. And of course, everything is getting worse. So now all of a sudden I have jaw pain. So, you know, it took a lot of research on my part to find a more, you know, successful path, but it takes people a while to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I get on a soapbox about Kegels too, because a lot of voice teachers will ask their students to do Kegels in lessons. And I'm like, please don't. If you're a voice teacher who asks your kiddos or your students to do Kegels, please don't. Please allow a pelvic floor specialist to determine if somebody needs to do something like that.
Yes.
It could really, and that's what I'm talking about, the different things that I see in my clinic of how pressure is it can create many different things. So just be really mindful. I mean, I'm not going to tell you not to do something because it's not my studio or my clinic. But please be mindful that that is probably not a great cue or drill to give in a voice studio. Let a pelvic floor specialist determine that.
Well, and most people, almost everybody, they might be weak, but most likely they're weak and tight. And the first thing they're going to need is some down training. So even if they would benefit from Kegels down the road, let's say they are hypermobile, they have a lot of laxity, they have a prolapse, we might at some point benefit from some Kegels. So I'm not trying to demonize them, but I'm saying that most people at a minimum need the down training first, learning to relax and ungrip, and then maybe following up with that Kegel motion, but not to start out with. Not usually.
Learning to breathe. Learning to inhale.
Right.
What is happening in the respiratory diaphragm and the pelvic diaphragm as we are in a resting state, in a resting breath. And coming up after this interview will be an interview with Susan Young, who talks about working prenatal through postnatal and through perimenopause and menopause with hormones as a voice teacher. So that is an episode coming up next. It's a great interview. We did it a couple weeks ago. And so to the listeners, stay tuned because that's coming up next. So
I definitely need to circle back and make sure I listen to that too. So.
Yeah, it's great. She also has an online training program, which we discuss a little bit in that, but I purchased and I do, and I love it. So it is a training program it's called Peri Through Post, and it's to help people through perimenopause and through menopause to continue with the lubrication around the voice and try to lessen the kind of stiffness and everything that's happening around through that time and through the hormone change. So it's a great program. Which
definitely need to check that out. A lot of my clients here in Nashville are kind of that era of big country, like late 90s, early 2000s, where women were like really like finally breaking into the country scene. Well, those women are in menopause, you know, and they still want to be performing. And sometimes they don't sound like they used to. And so that's kind of smack dab in the center of the type of things that I'm working on with my clients here in Nashville. So
yeah, well, check it out because it's really great. Susan Young, Peri Through Post. It's
great.
Really affordable. It's a great voice program. And that's who's coming up next. So you can take a listen in a couple weeks to her episode, and that's great.
Yeah.
So Erika, thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with me today. It is always so wonderful to talk with you, and I hope that we have more opportunity to talk together. Hopefully, I would love to come to your clinic and watch you work and see what you're doing and all of that. So
yes, that would be so fun. Come to Nashville anytime. Lots of fun things to do here.
Yeah.
In the voice world, lots of great people to talk to, but not a lot of people doing voice in the body. It's surprisingly not really, that I know of, a thing here. So if you feel like moving here, we'll take you.
Yeah. Woohoo. Yeah. But thank you so much. And
thank you so much, Christine.
Look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, tell your colleagues, students, and friends. Subscribe, rate, and please write a review. You can find us on Instagram or Facebook, and feel free to check out my website at www.thevisceralvoice.com for information on programs and upcoming events. I hope you join us next time for another wonderful conversation on The Visceral Voice.